Good morning. I grew up in a hot place, a humid place, hotter than this in the summer. And so whenever I think about summers growing up, I think about indoor things. I grew up next to the beach. It was always there. And the beach is not where you wanted to go in the summer. It was just too hot. So I did indoor things as a kid. So for me, summer has always been about movie premieres. I have a lot of fond memories as a kid of riding my bike to the Dollar Theater and watching movies in the summer because it was air conditioned. And it's a great thing. And today is one of those summer days where I get to enjoy a movie premiere. And I don't know if it's one that's on your radar, but I think today is the day I finally get to see the long anticipated Zombies 3. And I am excited. Show of hands, who knows the Zombies franchise? All the hands should be little hands. Yeah, that's right. It's not all I do, but I spend a decent amount of my time watching kids' TV and kids' movies. And the Zombies franchise is one of those things. It's part of my life, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The girls and I, we take turns sharing movies that are special to each of us. They pick something that they like, and they make me watch it. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. I pick things that I like and make them watch it, and sometimes they like it, and sometimes they don't. It's just part of our routine of what we do. Today is the day for that cinematic cultural exchange where I finally get to see the end of the trilogy, Zombies 3. And I'm looking forward to it. I doubt many of you know the franchise, so let me catch you up a little bit without spoiling anything. There are now 3 zombie movies, so named because the story follows a group of zombies that attend a high school full of normal people, the non-zombie folk. And for the first time in their history, the zombies get to go to high school with the non-zombie kids. And of course, it's a musical, because why not? Zombies 2 introduces werewolves to the mix, because zombies weren't enough, so you have to have the werewolves. And now Zombies 3 finally adds aliens. See, Matt's hooked. Good. And musicals. These are all musicals, okay? Without spoiling the whole franchise for you, because I know you don't really care anyway, but because I don't want to spoil anything and you want to go home and watch these on your own, what I find most fascinating about these movies is that they follow a very consistent modern trend in recent kids' media to reconcile and not defeat. The bad guys, which I'm not sure if it's even fair to call them that, and I'm not sure if it's the zombies or the normal people, but the bad guys, they're often not defeated or destroyed at all, but rather they are reconciled and redeemed. Take your pick. This is the trend these days. Moana is probably my favorite of the Disney movies, and it does this very, very well. If you haven't seen Moana by now, it's not a spoiler anymore, you're just behind. In Moana, there really isn't a bad guy. Yeah, there's a lava monster, but the lava monster is only a monster because she forgot who she was supposed to be. And the whole movie hinges on her returning to what she was called to be to begin with. There's no bad guy, there's no defeat, there's no destruction, there's no fight sequence, there's no battle that somebody dies in. It's not like the old days when you watched animated Lion King and Scar falls down to his death in a fiery pit. It's not like that anymore. The bad guys are not bad guys at the end of the movie. They become friends. This is the entire plot point for everything in the My Little Pony franchise. Watched it through and through several times over. It's amazing. Of all the kids shows you can watch, it's one of the best. My Little Pony is great because the bad guys never stay bad. They always get to be friends in the end. Just love that. It's fantastic. And kids' movies do this very well these days. All of them do it. Not whenever I was a kid. Whenever I was a kid, you went to the movies, you knew there was a bad guy and a good guy, and the bad guy was going to die at the end. Simple. Not anymore. Zombies 3, haven't seen it yet. Prediction. And the girls will hold me to it. Grace and Ellison, my prediction for the Zombies movie is that the aliens are going to end up like the werewolves, somehow joining the school, and everybody's going to be friends at the end. Don't tell me if I'm right or wrong, but that's my guess, because that's how it always is these days. More often than not, these stories play out this way. You can pretty much count on it. Being totally honest with you, I think I prefer it this way than the way it used to be. Rather than constantly framing conflict in terms of victory and defeat, there's this whole generation of kids growing up with a healthier option of conflict resolution. Instead of defeating your enemies, you reconcile with them. You can redeem anyone, even the bad guys. And before you tell me that it was better the old way, about how it'd be just plain wrong for John Wayne to befriend the outlaw, I'll remind you that these themes of reconciliation and redemption are biblical. This is what we see here in Psalm 138. A brief character list might help us kind of figure this all out and kind of sort through Psalm 138. Read Psalm 138 like a movie plot line. It'll fix everything. In this psalm, you have your main character, the psalmist. You have God. You have other gods. You have some unnamed enemies, and you have, well, you have some kind of conflict with them, and all the kings of the earth are involved in this. If this doesn't sound Lord of the Rings like, you're not reading it right. This should sound very much like Lord of the Rings. Now, if the psalmist was John Wayne, okay, here's the movie pitch. If the Duke was the one writing Psalm 138, or Clint Eastwood, or any number of your actors in the Old West, but probably not Gene Autry. I don't think he fits this. But you can do John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, fill in the blank. This psalm would look a little different. There'd still be the praising of God in front of all the other gods, and there'd still be talk of how great God is, especially in front of the other gods. That's the trash talk portion of the Western. But the enemies and their kings would probably all end up dead in the shootout at high noon, rather than the way they turn out in Psalm 138. Because that's just how you deal with your enemies when you're the Duke. It's just what you do. You call somebody to the shootout, somebody draws faster than somebody else, and the other person dies. It's just what you do. But not here. That's not what you do in Psalm 138. Here, the psalmist, surrounded on all sides by the kings, by all the kings, by the kingdoms, by the enemies, under threat of extinction, lowly and humble, the psalmist jogs out into the street, spurs and all, stands tall, but not on his own merit, not on his own strength, but with total confidence in God. Standing tall with humility, the psalmist declares the power and might and glory of God to all the other gods, to the kings of the earth, to all the enemies, which is the part where you would expect the doom, the destruction, the defeat, and the death that follows, the part where you think somebody's going to die in the action sequence, but it just doesn't. Confident in God's ability to strengthen and deliver him from certain destruction, the psalmist tells of a deliverance not built on defeat or victory, but in redemption and reconciliation. Rather than dying with an impressive CGI and special effects scene where God magically smites the kings of the earth, all of the kings of the earth, and you reread this line as much as you want to because it's critical, all of the kings of the earth instead have a change of heart that leads them to join the psalmist in praising God. The shootout turns into worship. The confident praise of God that the psalmist proclaims in the midst of certain doom is the weapon he wields that causes all the kings of the earth to turn from their gods to join the psalmist in praising the God. Could you imagine, just for a moment, entertain me, John Wayne showing up for the high noon shootout, and when it's time to draw, instead he bursts into song. Now, I imagine if it's John Wayne, it'd still be something like the Old Rugged Cross. Like if I'm going to pick a hymn, that's the one I think John Wayne would sing. But at which point the bad guy holsters his weapon and begins to harmonize with the Duke. And all of a sudden you have a John Wayne musical where they're singing praise songs together. It's a different kind of story, isn't it? I think that's a little far-fetched. Maybe. Well, let's try it a different way. What about the tale of Daniel and King Darius? Here's a good old-fashioned shootout. Daniel here is played by John Wayne, and Darius can be Robert Duvall or whoever you want it to be, or you can plug and play any sort of good guy, bad guy. You can have Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. I don't care which VeggieTale version you tell of the story of Daniel and Darius. It's always the same. Any combo that works for you, go for it. Daniel here is the good guy, and Darius is the baddie. But instead of a high noon shootout, there's a pit full of lions. You see, you know this one. Daniel's thrown into the pit of lions overnight to be eaten as punishment for not doing what Darius told him to do. But instead of dying, Daniel's alive the next morning. But here's the plot twist. Daniel does not come out of the pit to have a fight sequence with Darius, wherein he eventually falls into the pit and is eaten by the lions. That's what you would expect. That's how this should end. some sort of turn of events. Instead, Daniel is taken out of the pit, and Darius joins Daniel in praising God. Reconciliation. No defeat, no destruction, no death, no punishment. The bad guy gets brought into the fold. Same thing plays out in the prequel, where you expect an OK Corral shootout between Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with all of old Nezer's Chaldean gang. Instead, the good guys go into the fiery furnace, and when they don't die, old Nezer instead ends up joining the good guys and declaring God's glory. You read this earlier from Sodom and Gomorrah. There's this bargaining where it says, I don't want these people to die. Even if only 10 of them can be innocent, can't we save all of them? And God desperately wants to do that. There's this desperation to save all of them, whether they deserved it or not. There's hope of reconciling. It's all different stories, always the same ending. The bad guy isn't defeated. Instead, the bad guy becomes one of the good guys. All the kings of the earth shall declare God's glory. That's how the psalmist tells the tale. It's just not how we talk. That's not how we frame the story whenever it's up to us. We are so much more comfortable with and used to the idea of conflict ending with some sort of real conflict, something coming to blows. We almost need it. You might be willing to critique Disney and say that all these new movies like Zombies 1, 2, and 3 fall short because they don't have any sort of real conflict. But maybe that's just because we want too much conflict. There's been times throughout history, it works in waves, where people want conflict and then they have too much of it and then they never want to see it again until they want it and then they never want to see it again. And it goes and it goes and it comes and it goes. And I wonder where we are in that rhythm. I wonder where we are as a people when it comes to things like the war that's happening in Ukraine. Have we seen enough conflict to last a lifetime, or is there a desperation for more of it? Do you want the bad guy to be reconciled, or what is it we expect to come? It's broad terms. It's probably not fair to talk like that, but I think it's a fine question. If you found yourself today in a conflict of any sort, like Psalm 138, what would your battle strategy be? Would you be praying for God to send fire from heaven to smite all the Gentiles that live over there in that region, like James and John? Or would you stand in the middle of the road singing Fannie J. Crosby and hoping that your enemies join you? Different kind of story. Both can be good stories, I guess, in their own way, but Psalm 138 tells a tale that I think is optimistic. And there's nothing wrong with a little optimism. See, optimism has a cousin, we call it hope, and sometimes the two play very well together, and I think this is one of those times. Perhaps you know the movie better from Isaiah, and Isaiah tells the tale of two animal friends, a lion and a sheep. They're an unlikely pair, but somehow they make it work, and they lie down together and they take a nap, and everything's fine in the end. It's very homeward bound. It's a good story. But do you actually believe it? How believable are any of these stories? I mean, could the zombies really ever actually get along with the werewolves and the aliens? How believable is it? Is it all just fiction? Is it all just fantasy? Could all the kings of the earth really start praising God? Do we have the faith to move that mountain? And I don't know what the answer is. But I hope if the wind blows just the right direction, you could lose yourself in that story for an afternoon, or just long enough to find some hope. Perhaps that's a plot line that you could get optimistically lost in, that you could romanticize just a little bit. But I hope you can do more than that. Let me tell you about one more story. It makes for a fantastic movie, though some of the reboots haven't been that great. The troubling thing about the cross is that the good guy doesn't just sacrifice himself to save the other good guys. The good guy sacrifices himself to save the good guys and the bad guys, all alike. In fact, if anything, I think the good guy sacrifices himself on the cross to save mostly the bad guys. The cross is a Psalm 138 story. Always has been, always will be. The plot twist in the cross is that at the end of the story, after the good guy finally dies to save everyone else, the bad guys look up and realize they want more of that. So the centurion looks at Jesus and says, he's innocent. This is obviously the Son of God. Pontius Pilate looks down and says, there is nothing wrong with this man. And everyone who put him on the cross is forgiven and reconciled and brought into the church. It's a Psalm 138 kind of story. So if you find the whole idea about a lion and a sheep being friends and galloping in the field together to be unattainable, you have to throw the cross out with that story too. The cross has always been a story of enemies being reconciled. At the end of the story, the only person who dies is the best of us, and he dies so that all of us can lay down our arms and praise God together. That's where we're going. That's the road you're on. Whether you want it or not, whether you know it or not, that's the trajectory after the cross. Paul talks about this in some grandiose church words that I think are great, but not always very helpful. Paul talks about how God has reconciled all things to himself, and God is reconciling everything to himself. That reconciling everything includes the people that you can't stand and the people that you don't think should be there. They get reconciled at the end of the story, whether you like it or not, whether that's the shootout you were promised or not. I hope you're not disappointed at the end of the story. I hope you find that to be as beautiful as I do. And if you need more time and more training in this, start with the Zombies franchise. It'll teach you and train you well. There's a way of looking at the world where instead of there being good guys and bad guys, there really can just be God's people united in praise. Call me a dreamer. Call me optimistic. Call me hopeful. That sounds wonderful. This table is that. That's what this table has always been. Always will be long after this sermon. Always will be no matter how many zombie movies they make. This table is one of those places where everybody can come together in reconciliation, in unity, in hope, in praise of God. Because in this room are people that don't think the same thing that you do, that don't vote the same way that you do, that don't have the same opinions that you do, that you spend a lot of time on Facebook complaining about very loudly. And that's fine. If you want to be angry at people for the rest of your life, go for it. I can't stop you. Nobody else can either. But at this table, we don't do that. This table is a place of reconciliation where we all come together and realize that the best of us, Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, died for all of us, including the worst of us, especially the worst of us, so that we could come together and praise God together. It's a beautiful story. It's the best of stories. And if you think this new age of Disney falls short of any of that and isn't good, I'd say it's better. It's teaching children about something bigger than conflict. It's teaching them what lies at the end of conflict. Hope. What else do you need? So come to this table today. Find reconciliation, find hope, find optimism. Find a story worth losing yourself in. Let's stand and sing.